Hi, I'm Mark Mattioli, and welcome to another reading of Boston Accent. Boston Accent is available on Amazon.com. And my daily disclaimer, Boston Accent is an adult read. It is not for children. Okay, Boston Accent. Let's pick up where we left off yesterday. We're on Chapter 6, College. It seems that at least once a year, a college death will be reported due to a student falling from a window. What the hell were they doing? Your average reader is saying to themselves. Well, I'll tell you what I was doing when I almost became one of these college fall statistics. My high school buddy, Roy Barston, had enrolled in a prep school nearby. He was renting a studio apartment with another student, and he showed up on Saturday night wanting to raise some hell. Roy and I had done a lot of experimentation with psychedelic drugs, and we were always ready to try something new. In high school, we would pick the worst times to trip, putting very little thought into what we were setting ourselves up for, and we were usually at school. One of us would score something first thing in the morning before we even got in the building. The dealers would stand outside the main entrance, waiting for the buses to arrive. When they spotted a user, they would motion to you to follow them behind a tree or around a corner where no one could see the transaction. Drugs are cheap, and if you didn't have the money, you could run a tab. Roy and I would share our morning score and homeroom, and by the end of the first period, we would be out of our minds. Using drugs of this type in a school setting was one of the most extreme ways to experience the trip. It was like a competition between users to not get caught, to act normal, even though your current mind status was anything but. God forbid you let anyone know you were tripping and they start messing with your head. I remember one morning I dropped acid on the bus, and I was already peaking by the time I got to homeroom. I made the mistake of telling Roy, who sat in front of me, and every time he turned around to talk to me, he would cross his eyes, and it was freaking me out. I kept telling him to knock it off, and he insisted that he wasn't doing anything. That was part of my trip. I knew he was cracking up every time he turned around, but I couldn't see his face. At least I hoped he was messing with me, or I was in for a long day. One day, Roy and I skipped a mandatory assembly in the school theater. We were tripping and had been hiding in the boys' room. We decided to try to make it out of the building without being spotted to have a smoke. As we were headed for the exit, this kid we knew opened the classroom door and whispered, "In here," and waved to us. We entered the room, and there were several kids in there that were skipping the assembly same as us. Roy and I took a seat at the back of the room and watched as another student we knew stood at the front of the room pretending to be the teacher. He was in full character as he went on, addressing the class and writing on the chalkboard. He then paused long enough to light up a cigarette, and Roy and I looked at each other and said, "We have to get out of here." We headed out the closest exit and went down and sat on the front lawn under a shade of trees and began to have a deep conversation about us not being alone in the universe. We were never questioned about our drug use at school, but we received some long looks. The night Roy came to the school to visit, I had heard a rumor that a student had several bags of peyote and was selling some of it and keeping the rest for his head. This is a drug Roy and I had never seen, let alone used, so we headed quickly to the seller's dorm room. The seller explained that the buttons had to be properly cleaned, as they contained strychnine that could kill you in large doses. Small amounts of poison were unavoidable, and early symptoms of the drug taking effect included vomiting. Once you got past the puking, you could sit back and enjoy the high. It didn't sound too inviting to me, but Roy was all for it, so I went along. Excuse me. Coffee. We gagged down these disgusting, wet, and foul-smelling peyote buttons, and within a half hour we are throwing up and receiving high fives from our fellow partygoers that the worst is over, and it's all a good trip from here. I have to admit it was an enjoyable high. I just got a little too loose, and my best judgment went out the window, and I almost went with it. Someone had opened a window to air out the thick cigarette smoke, and I sat first on the sill and then thought it would be funny to hang upside down out the window. So I did. I was hanging from my knees from a third-story window when a girl yelled, "Grab him!" And 3 guys ran into the window and pulled me in. The guy whose room it was started giving me a rasping of shit along the lines of, "Kill yourself in someone else's room." So Roy and I left. We ended up walking back to my aunt's apartment, and when we got there, every light in the place was on. Roy and I stared in the window at my aunt, who was on her hands and knees scrubbing the floor. Roy looked at me and said, "What time is it?" I checked my watch, which showed it was 3 a.m. 3 a.m.? 3 a.m.? Roy repeated. "What the heck is she doing cleaning the house at 3 a.m.? He started laughing uncontrollably, and I had to pull him away from the window and back out to the street. I tried to rationalize what she was doing, and then I remembered the apartment was going to be inspected in the morning by the landlord. The project was infested with cockroaches, and the owner wanted to know which unit was responsible for bringing them in. Walking into that apartment at night was a horror show. As soon as you turned on a light, the roaches would scurry back to their holes. I didn't want to get in bed for fear of what was in there. We ended up hoofing it all the way back to school, where I banged on Slick's second-floor window till he let us in and we crashed on the floor. As a non-resident of the dorm, a resident had to sign me in and out. I couldn't just walk in, so Slick's second-floor window became a lifesaver. There was always a dumpster position underneath it, and I used it for a step. As the school year went on, this would be my only entrance to the dorms, as I was barred not once, but twice for inappropriate behavior and or damaging school property. The first time I got banned from the dorms, I wasn't the only one involved in the incident, but I was the only non-resident involved. The head of security also had a personal beef with me, as he had to speak to me many times for drinking at the front entrance of the school. I would go to the package store right next door to the school and buy a single 16-ounce can of beer. The clerk would put it in a brown paper bag that was made specifically for drinking a single can of beer in public, hence the term brown bagging. Some people think that term just means bringing your lunch to work, as opposed to buying lunch, but that's not what it meant in my world. The guard was one of the few people that called me by my real name, and when he did, it was telling me to drink somewhere else. My buddies would correct him. "He's the Kaiser!" And we would all laugh and cross the street to a little park in the median. I had put the moves on a 6'2" blonde walking a Great Dane in this park, only to get shot down and return back across the street to the howls of laughter from my friends, as they informed me the tall woman was a transsexual. That will sober you up in a hurry. The first incident I was disciplined for occurred after a wild party in the dorm, which took place on all 7 floors in the building. These parties were the best. You start out on the lowest floor and slowly make your way up through the building, partying with different people on every floor till you get to the top, and then you ride the elevator down and start all over again. Sometime very late in the evening, after one of these multi-floor parties, someone started pulling shut these pocket fire doors that cut the floors in thirds. They were buried in the wall, and someone knew they were there and ran from floor to floor, shutting all of them. You'd step out of a dorm room and turn to the right and walk right into a wall. The hall would be gone. I was actually in a room on the girls' floor when I left and found myself cut off from where I wanted to go. As I opened the fire door to get by, I was met by a very intoxicated student holding a fire extinguisher, which he opened up on me. These weren't the modern chemical extinguishers of today. These were pressurized water units, and this clown was soaking me. I did what I thought was best, which is knocking him to the floor, grabbing the fire extinguisher, and standing over him, spraying him until I heard my name. And it wasn't Mr. Kaiser, so I knew I was in trouble. Every floor had a manager that was a senior student, and they were responsible for keeping order on the floor. Their most common duty was knocking on doors and informing the resident student to turn down their stereo, but not tonight. I tried to explain that I was returning the gentleman on the floor a favor he had initiated on me, and that I had absolutely nothing to do with the fire doors. Security was called, and I was escorted out the door by a black woman security guard that always used to smile and giggle when I signed in and out of the building. I asked her one day why she was always laughing, and she said, "Because you're always so fucked up." I thought she wanted to go out with me. When I returned to school on Monday, I made a point of staying away from the administration building and the dorms, and I just went to my classes. While I was in my last class of the day, I saw the head of security enter at the front of the room and hand something to the professor. As the class ended, I was making my way for the door when my professor called me over and handed me an envelope. I opened it outside and found it was a notice from the dean of students that I was barred from the dorms until further notice. When the next Friday came up, I decided to test security and asked Slick to sign me in. The security guard was someone I didn't know, which is partly why I tried it, but they stared me down and said, "You're not allowed in the dorms." I asked the guard, "How do you know that?" He points to a picture of me that is under this clear mat on his desk. Slick laughs and says in his thick New Jersey accent, "You're a regular John Dillinger, public enemy #1. I asked Slick if he was going back to his room, and he nodded. I walked out the front door, went around the back of the building, and climbed in through his window. I beat the system this time. Okay, we're going to end it right there because another story is going to start up, and it's going to be lengthy. So we're going to call it quits right there. We're reading Boston Accent. I'm Mark Mattioli, and we'll see you next time. Ciao.